As the old saying goes, there is often more wisdom found in silence and listening than in speaking a lesson I have taken to heart while observing. The heads of state from numerous territories, specifically within the Commonwealth, where communities are currently facing some of the most severe climate threats existing on our planet today. When we look back at history, the union between King Charles and Princess Diana stands out as one of the most significant public events to ever capture the world's fascination. We are talking about a staggering viewership of over 750 million people glued to their screens. At the time those vows were exchanged, the entire world anticipated that this union would be nothing short of a blissful bed of roses, but sadly, reality painted a drastically different picture. The reason this so-called wedding of the century, which began with all the trappings of a fairy tale, descended into a total nightmare, will leave you absolutely stunned, particularly now that King Charles has finally come forward to confirm what the public has quietly suspected for years. Stick around as we peel back the layers and dive deep into the shocking hidden details of King Charles's marriage. Let us start with King Charles's early years. For literally decades, King Charles has been forced to navigate an existence under a microscope, dealing with a relentless spotlight that was often unkind and unruly. This constant attention brought with it a barrage of critics, harsh judgments, and shocking public opinions that swirled around Charles, intensifying as he prepared to become king. Despite the noise, Charles demonstrated a remarkable ability to weather these storms of controversy from a very tender age, steadily walking the path toward becoming the monumental figurehead of the British royal family, overcoming personal adversity while keeping his gaze fixed firmly on the ultimate royal prize which he eventually secured upon his coronation. For a long time it appeared as though the stars had aligned perfectly, for King Charles at least, until he chose to engage in dangerous games involving stakes that were simply too massive for anyone to control. For many years, the king managed to keep a lid on the severe repercussions that his decisions had birthed, suppressing the fallout effectively well, at least until very recent times when he decided to come clean. The revelations coming from King Charles have been nothing short of earth-shattering, and the highly respected, beloved, and admired monarch may have inadvertently done permanent damage to the dignified image he spent a lifetime constructing. I know we are all eager to jump straight into these scandalous confessions, but we need to pump the brakes just a little and contextualize where this story truly started. So, pay close attention as we rewind the clock to explore the formative years of the king. Charles was born into this world on November 14th in the year 1948. Unlike the vast majority of children, Charles was born directly into the constraints of royalty, and very quickly, he ascended to the role of heir apparent the moment his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth, took the throne in 1952. Even though Charles grew up alongside three siblings, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward, it was always Charles who was forced to bear the brunt of the media glare and experience royalty in its most intense form, a privilege that came with a heavy personal price tag. Let us take a deeper look at that specific period when he became the heir apparent. That title defined his entire existence right up until his coronation. With such a massive weight of responsibility looming on his horizon, there was simply no opportunity for Charles to enjoy a carefree childhood like the kids around him, or even like his own younger brothers and sister. He was immediately indoctrinated into the rigid lifestyle and strict routines expected of royal blood, and because this programming was instilled in him at such a vulnerable young age, it had a noticeable negative impact on his psyche, which became apparent whenever he appeared in public view. In another candid admission, King Charles opened up about the domestic atmosphere of his youth, describing his parents as being both physically absent and emotionally detached, leaving him feeling profoundly isolated during the critical years when a child craves parental affection the most. King Charles went on to drop another surprising detail that seems to finally provide an answer to a question that has been hovering over the public consciousness for the last few decades. If you have ever paid close attention to King Charles's interactions, particularly when he is navigating a high-pressure public event, it is almost impossible to miss the fact that he wears his heart on his sleeve. This incredibly emotional, somewhat vulnerable side of the king was not just an inherent personality trait but rather the direct result of deep-seated childhood trauma that compounded over the years. This sensitive and emotionally needy aspect of his character actually became a major point of controversy during the years leading up to his accession. A significant portion of the British public argued that it was not appropriate to crown a monarch whose compassionate side was so undeniable as tradition dictated a preference for a king who is stoic, unshakable, and tough, rather than tender and feeling. However, it is important to note that this empathetic nature was not just something Charles claimed about himself. There is actually a significant backstory explaining why he is this way, a story that will likely surprise you just as much as it surprised us. You see, as a young boy, King Charles was shipped off to one of the most grueling educational institutions imaginable for a child of his gentle temperament. His father, Prince Philip, insisted that Charles attend Gordonstown, and while the institution was ranked as one of the premier schools in the United Kingdom, it had its dark underbelly. The curriculum was physically rigorous, and Charles was subjected to relentless bullying which was far too much for the young prince to endure, causing him to emotionally crumble under the severe pressure of the environment. To this very day, King Charles still jokingly faults his father for forcing him to attend that prison in kilts. Yet in a twist of irony, King Charles has also found reasons to offer praise to the institution, as he has frequently credited the school with teaching him valuable lessons about his own limits, helping him understand both his internal abilities and his disabilities. But the king did not stop his story there. He elaborated further during a 1975 interview that, in a candid interview later in life, the monarch reflected on his days at Gordonstown, insisting that he was actually quite pleased to have gone there, and that the school's reputation for being brutally tough was blown way out of proportion. Charles eventually admitted that while he might not have relished every moment of his schooling, the real reason was simply his preference for the comforts of home over anywhere else. Once his tenure at the Scottish boarding school concluded, the expectation was for him to leave formal classrooms behind and step directly into the age-old royal custom of military service. However, the future king harbored different ambitions that would briefly fracture the status quo, prioritizing the pursuit of higher intellect over immediate enlistment. This divergence suggests that Charles had his own unique roadmap, one that would initiate a period of friction within the royal family, but ultimately mark the dawn of his serious intellectual endeavors. The blueprint was set for him to march straight into the British Armed Forces immediately after Gordonstown, echoing the path walked by generations of men before him. Yet, Charles yearned for a divergence from the norm, and despite knowing his choice could send shockwaves through the institution of the monarchy and affect the throne's future, his hunger for academic growth won out, leading him to make the unprecedented choice to head straight for university immediately after wrapping up his A-levels. This bold deviation by King Charles created a palpable tension within the House of Windsor, disrupting the traditional flow of royal duties. There were reportedly active efforts to steer him away from the lecture halls and back toward the barracks, but he displayed a stubborn resilience against the pressure. His refusal to back down allowed him to finish his studies, showing the world his tenacious spirit and determination to complete what he started. This persistence ultimately allowed Charles to make history as the very first heir apparent to secure a university degree, leaving the University of Cambridge with a lower second-class Bachelor of Arts. Now we need to discuss the chapter concerning King Charles's military indoctrination and the delays that preceded it. Because he had initially deferred, his service friction mounted within the royal family, turning some of his closest allies against his decision, while his naturally sensitive disposition played a significant role. The king found himself in the crosshairs of controversy and intense public skepticism as he faced numerous confrontations regarding his life choices. Many critics loudly questioned his fitness for the crown, with whispers suggesting he was intentionally dodging the military because he lacked the grit to survive the brutal training. The narrative being spun was that he was avoiding service because he knew deep down he couldn't handle the rigorous physical demands and the unforgiving environment. Ironically, this wave of doubt provided exactly the motivation King Charles required, and you might be shocked by how he chose to respond to the allegations. While he was still burying his nose in books at the University of Cambridge, he constantly battled accusations that he was merely hiding out to escape his martial duties. He faced significant difficulties and repeated confrontations, all centering on the growing perception that he was trying to wiggle out of national service. Eventually, the constant badgering crossed a line, and even a man of his patience reached his breaking point as the criticism became too much to ignore. During his sophomore year at Cambridge, King Charles stunned everyone by formally requesting training with the Royal Air Force, triggering a whirlwind of conflicting reactions. Initially, there was a sense of relief and celebration that perhaps the future monarch wasn't the fragile figure many assumed him to be. It seemed to confirm that he wasn't going to be the soft-hearted ruler everyone had pinned him as, but the public reaction remained complicated. Conversely, anxiety lingered as people wondered if he truly possessed the physical and mental fortitude to withstand the military's grueling standards and harsh discipline. Unfazed by the chatter, King Charles stepped forward to silence the doubters and immediately threw himself into the challenge. He wasted no time diving headfirst into the regimen with an initial fortnight dedicated to ground school that covered a variety of complex technical disciplines. This was followed by intensive lectures covering everything from airmanship and the physics of aerodynamics to aviation medicine and navigational charts. Throughout the course, the prince exhibited a sharp wit, keen intellect, and a genuine enthusiasm that his mentors hadn't encountered in a long time. His instructor, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Johns, later noted that Prince Charles possessed an innate aptitude for flying and absorbed new information with remarkable speed. Sir Richard Johns did not stop his praise there, elaborating that the royal was surprisingly easy to instruct and expressing admiration for his mindset. He was impressed not only by his intense focus and concentration, but also by his unshakable drive to succeed, telling the RAF website that failure was simply not an option for him. Such glowing endorsements from a high-ranking Air Chief Marshal shattered the public's previous misconceptions, proving King Charles was far more capable than they thought. These revelations helped the nation warm up to him, realizing he was different from the harsh judgments passed on him, but there is more to the story. Sir Richard recalled a specific training sortie, noting that while formation flying is an incredibly demanding skill, Prince Charles adapted to it with surprising ease. He settled into the cockpit comfortably and quickly mastered the activity, yet there was one specific hurdle he struggled to clear. The instructor attributed this difficulty to an inability to loosen up, so when advised to simply relax, the prince responded by spontaneously bursting into song. It was in that candid moment that Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Johns recognized Charles was truly a unique talent with a distinct personality. He realized the prince just needed guidance from the very best instructors available to help him unlock and attain his maximum potential. Finally, on the 19th of March 1971, King Charles was cleared to pilot jets completely solo and was fully prepared for active military duty. Following this achievement, he pivoted to a career in the Royal Navy, finally walking the path paved by his father-grandfather and both of his great-grandfathers. But the burning question remains, how did Charles actually perform during his tenure as a military pilot once he was in the thick of it? Did he manage to go above and beyond what was expected of him? We have those answers right here, so pay close attention. Regarding King Charles's military service records after passing out at RAF Cranwell, he launched his journey with the Royal Navy. He entered the service as a 22-year-old acting sub-lieutenant, joining an accelerated graduate program designed to push him to his limits. Following a grueling 2 months of intensive training at the prestigious Britannia Royal Naval College, the future monarch finally secured a coveted position aboard a guided missile destroyer. Even though his tenure on that particular vessel was relatively brief, his performance was nothing short of exemplary, distinguishing him among his peers. Shortly thereafter, he was transferred to the frigate fleet, specifically serving on the HMS Jupiter, where he began to truly understand the rigorous demands of life as an active serviceman. Operating during the height of the Cold War meant that the stakes were incredibly high, forcing him to rely on every ounce of his training in real-world high-pressure scenarios. But his journey didn't stop there. His naval career advanced significantly as he shifted roles, taking on the heavy responsibilities of a gunnery officer aboard the HMS Minerva. He would go on to further solidify his legacy within the armed forces when he was entrusted with a diplomatic mission to represent Her Majesty the Queen in the Bahamas. This occurred right as the islands were celebrating their independence in 1973, and as that chapter closed, he received orders for a new transfer. For a short period, he returned to the HMS Jupiter, the sister ship to the Minerva, spending the vast majority of his deployment patrolling the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Eventually, he made his way back to English soil to pursue aviation, dedicating hundreds of grueling hours to mastering the cockpit. Striving for perfection in the skies, he trained extensively with the Wessex Mark V helicopter at the Royal Naval Air Station. His natural aptitude for flight became undeniable when he was awarded the prestigious Double Diamond Trophy, recognizing him as the top pilot in his class. Following this achievement, the demands of the Crown called him back, forcing him to pause his military aspirations to fulfill his royal obligations. While this hiatus marked the beginning of a new chapter in his public life, the break from service turned out to be much shorter than anyone expected. By February 1976, he was back in uniform, fully aware that this assignment would serve as his final tour of duty in the armed forces. Given his stellar track record and proven capabilities, the Navy decided he should finish his service on a high note, entrusting him with significant command authority. For his last post, he ascended to the role of commanding officer aboard the HMS Bronington, a robust, ton-class minesweeper. He held this command for 10 intense months, guiding the small but vital vessel through a series of demanding maritime challenges. His command involved dangerous operations, including the disposal of old ordnance from the Second World War and tense encounters shadowing Soviet submarines. Finally, in December 1976, the future monarch concluded his active naval service, retiring with the distinguished rank of commander. Over the years, it became clear that he had forged a profound emotional bond with the Bronington, a ship that held a special place in his memories. When the vessel was recommissioned 4 years later, he made sure to attend the ceremony, unaware that fate was about to introduce him to something or someone life-changing. That someone would soon capture his attention far more than any naval vessel ever could, marking the beginning of the saga between Charles and Princess Diana. While the tale of their introduction is the stuff of legend, the true story of how they actually met might surprise you, differing significantly from the popular narrative. Many believe they first connected at a formal event arranged by Diana's sister, but as it turns out, that wasn't their initial encounter at all. Strangely enough, their paths had crossed well before that famous meeting, a fact that Charles himself has gone on record to confirm. Back in 1981, during an interview with The Telegraph, he opened up and shared the real details of their very first interaction. He described meeting her in the middle of a plowed field, a humble setting that the public often overlooks for two specific reasons. The first factor was the significant age gap. At the time, Diana was merely 16 years old, while Charles was already approaching his late 20s. While their ages created an initial barrier, the more pressing complication was that Charles was already romantically involved with someone else. He was actually dating Sarah Diana's older sister, though he couldn't help but notice how incredibly vibrant and full of life the younger Spencer was. Given the circumstances, he had to suppress any potential interest, keeping his distance during those early moments. This naturally leads to a puzzling question: if he was courting the elder sister, how exactly did he end up walking down the aisle with Diana? Stay with us as we unravel this unexpected twist. Although they barely exchanged words during that first meeting, the impact was undeniable. Despite the silence, Charles later confessed that he was completely captivated by her beauty, a reaction that is certainly easy to understand. Even without a meaningful dialogue, the encounter left a lasting mark, with Charles admitting more than once that she had caught his eye immediately. It is no surprise he was mesmerized. Looking back at photographs of her from that era, it is perfectly clear why she commanded such attention. She had a way of making men fall hopelessly in love with her, the prince included, even if that initial encounter didn't lead to an immediate romance. Nevertheless, he resolved to make a better impression the next time their paths crossed, and fortunately he didn't have to wait long for that chance. The opportunity arose when Sarah, still his girlfriend at the time, organized a shooting party, setting the stage for his first real interaction with the future princess. Amidst the festivities, the two managed to slip away when Charles requested a private tour of the gallery within her family home. That quiet moment alone allowed their connection to deepen, significantly intensifying his growing affection for her. From that point forward, events unfolded rapidly, creating a narrative that the world knows all too well. Their romance began to flourish in earnest, moving quickly from a spark of interest to a full-blown courtship. This whirlwind romance eventually culminated in a spectacular ceremony that stands as one of the most iconic royal weddings in history. It was a union that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of the British monarchy and leave an indelible mark on the world forever. At this stage in the story, you might assume the spotlight would naturally shift to Diana and Charles getting closer, but reality had a different script in mind, and it wasn't the fairy tale beginning everyone imagines. The biggest obstacle standing in the way was actually Diana's own sister Sarah. Following a particular party, Charles and Sarah jetted off for a romantic ski getaway, leaving Diana completely out of the frame. When the press got their hands on photos from the trip, the duo looked thick as thieves, practically glued together. To the outside world, it appeared that Diana was destined to remain merely the background character in her older sister's romance. However, fate has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. A sudden, jarring halt was coming for Charles and Sarah's fling, and honestly, the catalyst for this breakup is something you probably wouldn't see coming in a million years. Even though they were spotted looking cozy and affectionate in public, the dynamic shattered due to a single surprisingly blunt comment made by one of them regarding their future together. The moment those words hit the airwaves, it was effectively the death knell for their courtship. There was simply no coming back from the statement that was made. Now, given the royal context, you'd probably bet good money that Prince Charles would be the one to ruthlessly cut ties to ensure his path was clear. You might think he'd dump Sarah to pursue Diana, but that is not how this went down at all. In a twist that stunned everyone, it was actually Sarah who went to the press and dropped a bombshell interview with a magazine. She went on record stating explicitly that she was not in love with the prince, and more importantly, had absolutely zero intention of walking down the aisle with him regardless of his title. Naturally, this candor sent the British public into a total tailspin. The romance that everyone had been idolizing effectively evaporated the moment the ink dried on that page, while Sarah's brutally honest rejection left the media the public, and undoubtedly Charles himself completely floored. The real kicker came just a few short months down the line. Sarah didn't waste any time pining away. She almost immediately announced her own nuptials and tied the knot with Neil McCorquodale. But ironically, Sarah's swift exit from the royal dating pool is exactly what cleared the deck. With the elder sister officially out of the running, the lane was finally wide open for Charles to turn his gaze toward Diana. But you have to ask yourself, how exactly did that pivot from one sister to the other actually play out? We are about to dive deep into that chaotic transition. The saga of King Charles and his complicated road to matrimony is filled with details that redefine the word drama. When you look at the history between Charles and Diana, it is a complex tapestry woven with threads of genuine admiration, confusing affection, and ultimately shattering heartbreak. What kicked off as a seemingly random encounter in a plowed field would eventually spiral into one of the most tragic narratives in modern royal history. Diana later reflected on those early days, admitting that a huge factor in her falling for the prince was simply the novelty of it. She hadn't really been the object of serious male attention before this point. So when the heir to the throne suddenly started showering her with interest, it was understandably overwhelming for a teenager. But as the shock wore off, she began to acclimatize to the royal spotlight. They officially began courting, and on the surface it looked like smooth sailing. Charles seemed quite direct about his intentions, signaling that he was looking for a life partner, and Diana seemed to fit the bill. Things escalated quickly when Charles extended the golden ticket invitation a trip to the royal family's private sanctuary, the Balmoral estate in Scotland. In royal circles, that is a massive seal of approval. To the outside observer, it looked like the perfect romance, but Diana was completely blind to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She was walking straight into a personal catastrophe that the world would still be dissecting and debating nearly half a century later. The timeline was incredibly compressed. After a mere 6 months of what could loosely be called dating, a ring was produced, and the couple was officially betrothed. At the time, Diana was swept up in the euphoria of it all. She truly believed she was falling deeply in love with Charles, and the prospect of their wedding filled her with optimistic joy. When the palace officially announced the engagement between Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, it broke the media. It was the only thing anyone on the planet wanted to talk about. The anticipation built for what was dubbed the wedding of the century. However, Diana's experience would eventually become the ultimate cautionary tale, proving that old proverb right: not everything that glitters is gold. The tragedy is that she had to learn this lesson in the most brutal public way possible, leading many to wonder why the red flags weren't spotted sooner. Hindsight is 20/20, but looking back, there were definitely warning signs screaming that this union was doomed before it even really began. Let's zoom in on one of the most painfully obvious moments that should have sent alarm bells ringing in everyone's heads. It happened when the newly affianced couple sat down for their first major television interview. Instead of radiating love, the interaction filled viewers with a strange sense of unease. Beyond the dazzle of that massive sapphire ring, which was inspired by Prince Albert, there was a specific exchange during the broadcast that was impossible to ignore. Even Diana felt the tension. The entire vibe was stiff and awkward, exposing a severe lack of genuine chemistry or emotional connection between the two of them. But the nail in the coffin came when Charles fielded a specific question. His answer effectively cursed the marriage before they even made it to the altar. The interviewer asked a standard softball question: "Are you two in love?" This should have been easy, but it led to Charles's most infamous verbal slip-up regarding affection. Diana answered immediately and enthusiastically, confirming her feelings with a definitive "of course," wearing her heart on her sleeve. Charles, on the other hand, threw a wet blanket over the entire moment by adding the cryptic and chilling caveat, "whatever in love means." That comment didn't just confuse the audience, it horrified them. Combined with his distant body language, it painted a very bleak picture of the reality behind the palace gates. It was a glaring indicator of Charles's true emotional state regarding Diana, marking the official beginning of their marital troubles long before the vows were exchanged. These issues would soon snowball into an avalanche of pain for the young princess, who was tragically unaware of the emotional trauma and isolation waiting for her. Even though their wedding day was a global spectacle, drawing in a staggering audience of over 750 million people watching from every corner of the earth. It was broadcast across 74 different nations. The couple received more than 3,000 wedding presents, and the event itself racked up a bill exceeding $40 million. Yet all that pomp, circumstance, and money couldn't buy happiness, nor could it shield Diana from the miserable reality that was barreling toward her. Throughout the duration of their marriage, Diana was besieged by controversies. One particularly stinging issue was Charles's vocal disappointment when he learned their second child was a boy, as he had desperately wanted a girl. Add to that the incessant arguments and the cold shoulders. The pressure became suffocating for Diana, pushing her to her mental and emotional breaking point. With the entire world watching her every move, through a microscope, hiding the cracks in the relationship became impossible. But at the end of the day, the root of the issue often led back to Charles's own behavior. A scandalous illicit romance that would ultimately dismantle the entire royal union, a tragic betrayal that set the stage for the heartbreaking loss of Princess Di years later. You see, in the tumultuous days leading up to the royal wedding, Diana was plagued by doubt and seriously considered calling the whole thing off, even though it was initially just a fleeting hesitation. But the situation escalated drastically when she stumbled upon a devastating discovery. Charles had prepared a sentimental, personalized bracelet for his former flame, Camilla Parker Bowles. That discovery was the final straw, and she was ready to walk away from the altar entirely. However, under immense pressure and persuasion from Charles and her own sisters, she felt trapped. Reluctantly, she proceeded with the ceremony, clinging to the fragile hope that Camilla would fade into the background, but Charles had absolutely no intention of letting his past love go so easily. He couldn't sever ties even after settling into married life and being blessed with 2 wonderful sons, despite Diana being painfully aware that Charles had rekindled his intimate connection. She knew he was back in the arms of Camilla, a realization that she later described as the single most shattering and devastating day of her entire existence. Yet Diana was determined not to let her family crumble into ruins, so she fought tooth and nail to save the relationship. But one has to wonder, could she really salvage it all by herself? When a rare opportunity presented itself at a party, Diana summoned all her courage to meet face-to-face with Camilla, confronting the mistress directly about what was going on with her husband. Diana believed that this bold public confrontation would be sufficient to scare the mistress off for good, but Camilla was far too entrenched and had no intention of bowing out quietly or quickly. Instead of ending things, the confrontation seemed to add fuel to the fire, making the affair between her and Charles even more intense, as the pair began appearing more brazenly in the public eye. However, the true explosion of scandal didn't happen there. The real turning point occurred when an intimate leaked phone conversation between Charles and Camilla surfaced, exposing their secrets to the world. In a desperate bid to salvage his reputation and control the narrative, Charles finally sat down and admitted to what the entire globe already suspected, confirming his infidelity on national television. This public admission completely shattered Diana, leaving her visibly devastated every time she stepped out, and the pain was evident in the bitter way she spoke about the man who would soon be her ex-husband. It was painfully obvious to everyone watching that the Princess of Wales was deeply wounded, famously stating that Charles made her feel insufficient and inadequate in every single aspect of her life. The royal marriage was teetering on the brink of total collapse for years, and eventually the inevitable happened when they formally announced their separation to a stunned public. It marked a sorrowful conclusion for the couple and a shocking abrupt end to a ceremony that had once been celebrated globally as the fairy tale wedding of the century. So I want to hear your take. What do you think about King Charles's behavior during his marriage to Diana? Was there any logic in pursuing her if his heart was elsewhere? Why drag her into a royal life only to let it all fall apart because of ongoing extramarital affairs? Please drop your thoughts and opinions down in the comments section below. If you found this deep dive interesting, please make sure to hit the like button, share this with friends, and subscribe right here for more compelling stories just like this one. Also, don't forget to click on the next video appearing on your screen right now. I guarantee you are going to find it fascinating. Also, definitely go ahead and click on that next video popping up on your screen right now, because I promise you are going to absolutely love it.